In this Hell Is Us review, I'm going to be talking about the new action role-playing title or action-adventure title from Rogue Factor that is available to play today if you have the deluxe edition of the game, but will be coming out on September 4th. If you don't, I'm going to be talking about the story and setting, we're talking about the gameplay, the graphics, the performance of the game, and ultimately whether you should spend your money on this game right now or you should wait until later or maybe not even play it at all. So we'll begin with the story and setting of this title. This game follows Remy, who is a man that was smuggled out of a fictional country on planet Earth called Hadia in the middle of a brutal civil war when he was just a child. And he's essentially returning to that area of the game as an adult, trying to find what happened to his parents in the middle of this brutal civil war that continues to rage many, many years later. And as he gets into this country, he starts finding out very quickly that things are not right here. And it's not just the civil war, that these supernatural events are occurring all over the place, and you start encountering these kind of supernatural beings that you'll fight throughout the game that are trying to basically destroy you. And a lot of the game's story and setting not only revolves around him trying to find his parents, but also navigating through this war-torn country while he tries to unravel the mysteries of who these supernatural beings are, why they're here, and why they're only in this country of the planet. Now, the story and setting of this game are absolutely fantastic. They are one of the standout features of Hell Is Us, and I think anyone who's looked at this game over the last year or two and its development can see that this game has a vibe that's quite unique compared to other games out there. Rogue Factor has essentially invented a fictional country where they have created thousands of years of history. They've explained why this civil war has been happening in this country throughout that time period and what this supernatural event that's been happening is, how it's related to that. They've done a really, really good job at this. And in fact, as I played further and further into Hell Is Us, I found myself reading more and more of the lore notes, getting my hands on every single thing I could read about the history of this game. And a lot of action games or a lot of games of this nature, I find myself exploring for the loot. Like, I want better weapons, I want better equipment, things like that. So I'm always trying to solve puzzles and get through things in order to get better loot. But in this game, I found myself actually doing it for the opposite reasons and doing it for the story alone. The loot was okay, but the story itself was what was driving me to explore, because after a certain point, I just couldn't get my hands on enough of the lore and story of this game. And it was kind of like reading a novel that was a mystery, and you really, really wanted to uncover the secrets of it. And that's just not something that many, many games do. There's so much background lore exposition in a lot of role-playing games that I play that I never read, simply because there's so much of it. And a lot of the storytelling is done in a very direct way that you don't need it. But in this game, I just couldn't help myself. And as I went further, I found myself backtracking and rereading things, and it started making sense to me. And it was just absolutely fantastic. The only real disappointing factor for me in the story and setting was the ending. I'm not going to get into what the ending is for spoiler purposes and things like that, but I just found that it didn't really do it for me. I obviously have a subjective opinion on the ending. I'm sure there are people out there that will enjoy it. It wasn't a terrible ending or anything like that, but it wasn't an ending that satisfied me. And so I felt like a lot of the effort that I put into studying all this stuff and reading all these lore dialogues and text and all that stuff was kind of not respected. And that kind of hurt a little bit at the end of the game. And I think you'll see that reflected in the review score of this. But I think there are also people out there that are going to be happy with the ending of the game. I don't think this is a unanimous thing by any means. So it's possible that you'll see people that don't have a problem with the ending as well. So talking a bit about the gameplay of Hell Is Us, you kind of break it down and really into two things. You have exploration and then you have combat. The exploration of the game is kind of broken down into, I would say, maybe a dozen maps of the game that you'll fast travel between. And each one of these maps you can kind of explore. The very first map of the game is quite linear in nature. So at the beginning of the game, you just kind of follow, the guided path as you learn the mechanics of the game. But it definitely very much opens up after that in the second map of the game. And other maps are kind of a mix between like open world exploration on that map and more linear corridors. So you're going to get a little bit of each depending on what map that you're on. But you'll explore these maps, trying to unravel the mysteries of the game while you're also helping a lot of the characters of the game with their plights and their problems, and these are called good deeds. And a lot of times these people need you to get something for them or talk to somebody for them. And what's really unique about this game is that you can actually trade with every single NPC in the game. A lot of NPCs you don't need to trade with, so it's kind of there as like a red herring so that you don't know what to do with a lot of items that you pick up. But you really have to pay attention to the items that you pick up and figure out which NPC they need to go to help them. Maybe one NPC is needing medicine for some medical problem that they're having, and you pick up medicine on a completely different map. you got to remember, oh, that person over there needed this medicine and get it back to them quickly. Because something that's really interesting about this game is that, like in that instance, for example, if you were fast traveling around a lot and progressing the game forward a lot and you didn't give this person the medicine, they may die from their illness because they didn't get the medicine that they needed. So you can actually fail good deeds by not finding what they need and giving it to them quickly enough in this game. I failed many of them. I'm sure you will fail some of them when you play through the game. And I really like that it's a little bit of trial and error and a little bit of deduction. And the game's not just saying, oh, give this item to this person. Like, you have to remember and figure out who to give these things to. And because you can trade with everyone, it's not as easy as it seems. And beyond the good deeds portion of the game, you have a lot of exploration of the game's puzzles. There are a lot of puzzles in this game. They're usually called mysteries. These are typically locked doors or locked chests that reward you with some sort of loot or lore, as I mentioned earlier. And, you either need to find a key. Sometimes it's that simple. You just need to find a key for the door. Or sometimes there's like a combination that you need that you have to deduce from certain aspects of the game. Or maybe you need to trigger a bunch of switches in a specific order. That's, the clues to that are located throughout the maps of the game, and you need to figure what they are and put them together. And they range from very simple to very complicated. And there were a couple points in the game where I got stuck on some of the puzzles for like 20 or 30 minutes, and then I finally solved them, and it felt really, really good. So the game doesn't go like, oh, you need this to open blah door. Like, it's not what all exploration and so many AAA games has like turned into. It actually gives you a chance to solve the puzzle, use your logic skills, use your intellect. And it feels really good when you get to do that. That's sorely missing in a lot of games these days. And I'm really glad they've kind of gone back to that. And it's not impossible either, because the game will remind you where some of these locked doors and chests are. So you at least know the region that they're in. It doesn't tell you where they are. There's no map in the game. But like, if you can't remember where a chest was, but you found a key and you're pretty sure it's for that chest, if you go into your like menu, it'll at least tell you which region it is, and you can look around in that region, and it usually triggers your memory. Oh yeah, it was around this area. You go find it and you open it, and that still feels really good in my opinion, even if you couldn't quite remember where it was. And another thing that I really like about Hell Is Us is after a certain point in the game, many, many maps open up simultaneously that you can explore, and you can do so in any order. So you can go to like this map or that map or another map, and it doesn't really tell you like which one you have to. You have simultaneous objectives that you need to do. So you can, do them in whatever order you want. And I like that freedom. I miss that freedom in games where like you can go to one region before and have a different experience than if this person goes to this other region instead. And it's a simple thing really, but I really enjoyed that I could just kind of figure it out, and I had to decide, where do I want to go? Do I like this place? And I found myself like exploring one place and being like, I don't know, this seems pretty hard. Let me go try a different area. And I really liked that like I could bounce back and forth and decide what I wanted to do in what order. And while I really enjoyed the exploration and sort of storytelling, the way that it's combined in this game, combat itself is another matter. The foundations of combat in this game, the attacking, dodging, parrying, the skills, the equipment, all of that is actually really good in this game. The foundations of combat are there. But what's really lacking in this is enemy variety. The enemy variety of this game is very, very poor. And I would imagine, I think it's probably by somewhere in the middle of the second area of the game, so we're talking about 3 to 4 hours into the game, you'll have fought about 80% of the game's enemies. This means that like all the base enemies you'll have fought, and there's some slight variations of these enemies as you progress through the game. But because 3 to 4 hours into the game, you'll basically have fought most of the enemies in the game, and then you have another 25 hours after that, combat tends to get very repetitive from that point onward, because you're just fighting more of the same and more of the same. And a lot of times, combat encounters, to make them more difficult, are simply from having lots of more enemies on the screen, because there isn't like some unique enemy that's very difficult to fight through its own unique combat mechanics. The way to increase difficulty is simply either by adding more enemies for you to fight at the same time, or upping the damage that these enemies do. And neither one of those things are great. The general enemy variety is very bad. And the other thing that really got me about this game is there's not really any unique boss fights. Most of the boss fights are just souped up versions of regular enemies that you've already fought a lot. So I found it really, really kind of meh that this game has, self-proclaimed 50% combat from the developers and 50% exploration, but the enemy variety is so weak, it makes the combat element of this game very, very weak. On top of this, there are only 4 weapon types in the game, and many of the skills in the game are not overly useful, even though there are actually a lot of skills. Some of them are really good. Some of them are meh. Like, that's, just the reality of it. And because you only have 4 weapon types in the game, what I found for myself was that I gravitated towards one weapon type. and then I just used that weapon type the whole game. And it's, there was no improved versions of that weapon. The weapon just leveled up the more I used it, and there wasn't like any variations of it whatsoever, really. So that contributed to the repetitiveness of combat, because if you're using the same weapon from the very beginning of the game to the very end, without any like real experimentation, you do a little bit, of course, trying to figure out if the other weapon types are for you, but you'll quickly realize that, you gravitate towards one weapon type more than the others. And since weapons level up from using them, it just kind of makes sense to stick to one weapon. And there aren't any variations of it, really. So it adds to the repetitiveness of combat. There are relics that you can equip in the game that provide passive benefits, like rings or talismans would in the Souls games or Elden Ring. I like these for the most part. These added to the variety of the game, but they didn't really change the gameplay enough to make it less repetitive than it was. And I did really like the drone functions in combat. Previous iterations of the game, the drone was not super effective. It didn't deal enough damage in my estimation, but I like the current iteration of it. I like the abilities that you can slot on it, and changing these and mixing and matching these is a fun part of the game. And you'll find that you use the drone a lot in combat. From an audio, visual, and design perspective, the way the game looks is absolutely stunning, in my opinion. I love the visual design of Hell Is Us. I like the artistic direction of the game. Graphically, it looks pretty. It has an interesting vibe in these war-torn hellscapes with these ruins that are hundreds, if not thousands of years old, scattering it, with also a sci-fi feel. So it's kind of got some like sci-fi, almost fantasy elements to it. I really like the way the game looks. So that was absolutely stellar. The music of the game is an absolute standout. It sets such a vibe in this game and immerses you into the gameplay. I can think of very few games that do a better job of selecting the right music and putting it at the right times in the game as Hell Is Us. Again, both the executive producer and creative director have backgrounds in music, so this is not shocking to me. And the voice acting in the game is pretty solid itself. The sound effects are solid. Remy's character is probably the least interesting character, unfortunately. He's the protagonist of the game. I found him to be kind of dull and bland. There are lore explanations for kind of why this is in the game, but generally speaking, I found that I resonated a lot more with some of the other characters in the game than the protagonist, which is kind of unfortunate. But overall, the sound, in terms of voice acting, was pretty solid. Performance-wise, I was getting about 80 FPS on high settings on 1440p with a 3080 Ti and a 12900K processor, which was pretty good in my opinion. The game looked good, it ran smoothly. I probably had 3 or 4 frame dips the whole time I played in 30 hours, which is not much at all. I've seen that it runs really well on consoles, although I haven't played it. I was playing on PC, obviously. I had 0 crashes in the 30 hours, so that's excellent. And I did have a couple bugs. These bugs were basically the same bug repeated, which was like I would go to talk to an NPC sometimes, and even though like the prompt was there, I couldn't talk to them. And I just simply found that reloading the game and talking to them fixed that issue. So it wasn't really much of an issue for me. But other than that, I had no other bugs whatsoever. Talking a little bit about the replayability of the game, it took me about 30 hours from start to finish to get through the game. But I think you can probably squeeze out another 5 to 10 hours if you do all the good deeds and you do all the mysteries in the game. These are like the locked doors and chests and helping NPCs. I probably missed about 20 to 25% of them in my playthrough. I just couldn't get around to them or didn't have time to solve them. So you may be able to push this to about 40 hours in a playthrough. But since there are no decisions to be made, you don't have what do I want to do in this scenario, that scenario, you just do a quest or follow the quest line. It's pretty linear. And the combat is so repetitive, I don't see people playing this a second time. In my mind, there's one ending to the game as well. So it's not like you have another reason to play because there's a different ending. So I don't think people are going to play this more than once. So you're looking at 30 to 40 hours of gameplay for your money. Price point Hell Is Us is $49.99 on PC and $59.99 on Xbox and PlayStation. There's also a deluxe edition of the game that's $69.99 on PC and $79.99 on console. This does give you 3 days early access to the game, so technically if you own those, you could play now, along with some other goodies that you get from the game. But generally speaking, I think if this game didn't have as much repetitive combat as it did, I could recommend buying this game at the standard price point of $49.99 or $59.99. I certainly wouldn't recommend the deluxe edition to play early. If that's the sole reason you're doing it, I wouldn't recommend that. But if the world building and the storytelling and the immersion factor are enough for you, I can definitely say that this is probably a good day one buy for you. But if you're someone who knows they're going to be disappointed by repetitive combat, who's looking forward to cool boss fights, you're not going to get that in this game. I definitely wouldn't recommend buying it at its default price, and I would probably say you're going to want to wait for a sale simply because of that aspect, say maybe somewhere around $30, $35, or maybe lower than that. So final thoughts on this game. Hell Is Us is one of those games that really had the potential to do something special, and it actually manages to do this in many, many different ways with its unique storytelling and world building and its hands-off approach to exploration and puzzle solving. It has a lot of those things that are desperately needed in the gaming industry that make it quite special. But ultimately, it falls short because of the combat and enemy variety. It simply does not do enough and deliver enough in those areas to be a complete total package. If combat wasn't so much of this game, I would say that it could be overlooked more easily, but being 50% of the game from Rogue Factor's own mouth, it's really disappointing that more energy and focus were not placed into this aspect in order to bring it on par with the rest of the game. And had it been, I think it's very likely or possible that Hell Is Us would be in contention or at least in the list of nominees for Game of the Year, even in a year where there are so many great games already. But as it stands with the combat the way it is and how much of the game it is, that's simply not the case.